I'm very excited that you guys are here today because some of you can't make it from your class, but we have a video recording that we set up so that everybody who's missing class today can actually then have the joy of watching this at home. And because I don't wear caps and I don't dance a lot, I think it won't be as exciting as being in person in the class. But we do our best. We're going to sort of flip through several different presentations because I will try to do my best to cover a really large subject for you in this next for some hours. Some of you actually had quite exposure to all of this because you were in the restoration class where we did this hands-on and in detail, and some of you may have heard about a lot of these things in other ways. But we're going to explore all of these things called stormwater management and low-impact development techniques through food production and how that relates to urban agriculture, what it makes sense and how to use those things and what doesn't make sense and why you probably don't want to experiment with those if you really are growing food. I will also cover a little bit about codes and regulations that may affect what you do because there is a whole vast of all kinds of laws and codes and everything else that drives low-impact development today. And urban agriculture has somewhat of a different set of rules and minimal rules, and because they are not regulated by the same agencies and by the same systems, you can't just switch them over and use areas for both solutions. It's very tricky. So we want to cover those driving forces too and make sure that if you choose to move forward with food growing, then maybe you can manage things that they do double duty. So first of all, I want to cover low-impact development reasons and goals. Many of you have seen this, and if you are bored, put your hands up and then I'll sing it. Well, now do you really want to hear that? Okay, so actually, I used to sing before. I had, when I was 18, I had a really bad laryngitis, and I didn't listen to my doctor, and I kept going to the practices, and after that, I'm sounding like a crow. But, you know, I can keep the beat. So anyway, and that's when I went into horticulture and stormwater management, right? So this is a favorite picture of mine, because if anybody ever doubts why you would even think about doing things sustainably and ecosystem positive, I will talk about that term. It's a fairly new term that's coming online now, and you will hear it more and more. And using low-impact development technologies, well, ask the snowmen, because pretty soon they will have no habitat and we won't have them. And that's a real terrible thing. It's funny to talk about it here in the classroom, but the consequences that we are looking at losing snow and snowman habitat is something so serious that we really don't have a paradigm for it. So this is your typical development. You see it every day on the streets, no matter where we live in the world. This is very common. You look at asphalt, you look at roofs that are not allowing anything to grow, and you have tremendous amount of runoff. Yesterday, with those little rainstorms that came through and dumped like showers, the runoff amount was sudden and huge. So that's what happens. And then this is what we did in the US and around the world. You travel Europe, and this is most of the rivers that they look like in the city. It's all concreted. You have some beautiful tourist boats pulling up to the side. You can get on, and then you can enjoy the view. And if you see any life in those waters, it's struggling because this water provides no habitat. It has no shade. It warms up, heats up. What happens to warm water compared to cold water? That's very important for critters. Oxygen. Yes, the oxygen level drops. So they are actually suffocating in their own habitat. So that's a very, very sad story. And then this is another thing that happens, because as we walking around, you see people throwing the cigarette butt in the trash and the whatnot. Stormwater comes in with the rain, it washes it all in there, and then it sits there. This is another big problem. Why? What do you see here? It's all sediment. So if it hits all at once and not over the course of a long time, like years and years and years, as wind blows and it falls off the trees and the shrubs and lands in water, breaks down, critters eat it, it all hits at once off of the city sidewalk because the rain just came and washes it, then all of a sudden everything that was in the creek bed and in their maybe even gravelly space, it's all suffocated, it's all compressed and compacted. This is a sad image, and to me it's sad not because of the black in 1996 in the map, which is all development, but the fact that this is almost 20 years old. It's an 18-year-old picture, guys. And what we know, because I lived here now for 25 years, what we know is that since 96, we didn't add canopy back. This only got worse, a lot worse. And then you see these all the time. Backyards, beautiful water habitat because we still have a lot of water surfaces, even though we tried filling in as much of the wetlands and marshes as possible. And what people want to see the water when they're doing dishes, when they are around the house and having a party. And they especially want to see this type of view if they're thinking about selling that house. And so if you were actually somebody living in here, little water insect or a fish or even a microbe in that water, you would have no food, very little oxygen, and practically no place to hide. However, you would constantly have to deal with irrigation runoff because this grass looks fairly green, and whatever that brings, including fertilizers and weed and feed. I don't see any dandelions in there. So you constantly have this toxic slough coming at you, but you have no place to go from there. And then I said that when it rains heavily, like yesterday, water is collecting, and it's usually moved into a catch basin, from there into a pipe, and it's either going into a pipe system that takes it into the sewer system. That's one way in the older areas, old Snohomish City, old Everett areas, old Seattle, some of those, they will take it to the sewer system. The other will move the pipe, like from this campus, into the nearest waterway and dump it all at once into that little stream that's out there, or the wetland, and it hits right away. So you have all of this water collecting from the city, from the urban area, and it comes in. That's not natural, and it's really severe. We have flash floods practically in those streams, even though we're not having flash flood on the street, so we are not concerned with it. Water critters are very seriously concerned because they are experiencing a flash flood, and it erodes the banks, it undermines vegetation, and this is usually what it looks like. You've seen this a lot of times, I'm very sure, if you pay attention to streams and creeks nearby your place. This is not the good color of a stream. This is not a good flow of a stream. You're not up in the mountains where you have some waterfalls and rushing snowmelt. This is city. And so we now have regulations that is addressing all these problems, and it's driven by a couple of things. As we talk in code, I'm gonna go into a little bit more detail, but one big engine for us in protecting our waters is the salmon, because salmon is money. We pay attention when it's hitting us in the pocketbook. Salmon is industry. It's a huge market for people who are fishing, including the tribes, including commercial fishermen, and including private individual fishing folks who are out there having a fun time. You know, the permits and everything else, the fishing gear that gets sold, it's pretty important. So now that it's a challenge because we don't have enough salmon to provide for all those funds to keep rolling, we're paying attention, and salmon became an endangered species. a lot of them. And a lot of them are on the verge. So now we have regulations that are enforced by the federal government, and it's demanding that we get back to our 3 C's, the clean, cold, and clear water, because that's what fish, and especially salmon, needs in order to stay alive and thrive. You see the eggs here covered with sediment. They will never hatch. This is what they need to look like. This is the combined sewer overflow, but I had told you about that in some areas, especially in older areas where city is looking at 60, 80, 100 years of drainage and sewer system. They have rainwater collecting into the same pipes and ponds where the sewer goes. It's the combined sewer system. And when we have rains like yesterday, our sewer systems are on overload. We have too much water arriving all of a sudden because now we have all this rain to get in there too. The sewer system can't hold it anymore. And as it overflows, it's called combined sewer overflow. It's the CSO, and it's absolutely legal. Because do you want that sewer pond to flow into the neighborhood? Well, how many of you would you like to have this in your basement? Not many. So it's a totally legal event to overflow it into the nearest natural waterway. It has to go somewhere. We are on an overload. However, because we have the salmon challenge, we now have limited volumes that each sewer system has a permit for. How many gallons a year they can overflow, and how many times that can happen. And if they exceed that, there is a financial fee, a charge that they have to pay. It's a penalty. That comes out of your sewer bill, by the way. So this penalty is there to drive improvement, to find other solutions managing runoff. Because if they take that money and they're not giving it in penalty, but they invest it into a solid management system, they can reduce the volume and the number of overflow events. This is another challenge. Hopefully you will never have to deal with it because you're going to be growing food. But this is what our habit of fun does to our environment. I can't tell you how upset I am when I get these marketing advertisements online, and a lot of times comes in junk paper. I don't know how many times I feel that I don't want those papers. It still comes. Having fun. None of that is ecosystem positive, and most of it is not even low impact. So I want to talk a little bit about ecosystem positive. We had, up until recently, this notion that reducing our impact, negative impact on the environment is going to do good. Until now, finally, we are understanding that reducing the impact is still an impact. If I don't beat you with a 2x4, but I slap you just a little bit, you're still gonna get slapped. It's much better to actually have a positive impact, something that improves your life. And that goes for the ecosystem as well. So we are still using the terms low impact development because seriously, it's still a development, and so it's a reduced impact. It's still going to alter ecosystem tremendously. But now we have discussions around the globe about different models that actually are positive impacts for ecosystem. And that's when you hear ecosystem positive. And it goes for communities as well. Positive impact on communities. These are the new terms for economy development. And I started recently, this last year, teaching a program actually in Hungary that's an international program. And it relates to what we call blue economy because it's talking to the blue planet. And it's no longer reducing impact, but it's benefiting everything and everyone it comes in contact with. And so when you do anything, that's why this program is so cool, because they've is teaching you on how to actually create positive impact with everything that you do. And that's really the same oath that doctors have to do. First, do no harm. It's very simple. So low impact is great, but it doesn't cut it. And this obviously is very high impact, very negative impact. And these are results. So I want to talk about this in more detail. We already gone through the fact that we have a natural water cycle, but it has also a lot of other implications. Water cycle is very intimately connected to chemistry cycles, including nitrogen cycle. It is also very important in terms of atmosphere and climate. So it's not just that we are reducing the negative impact or actually impacting salmon positively, but we are able to alter our own climate with how we manage our cities. This is why stormwater management is becoming so important. If you have an uninterrupted native vegetation, which in our case happens to be coniferous forests, deep forests with lots of layers, but in the case of Midwest, it used to be, bless you, it used to be prairies. Lots of beautiful wild areas that didn't have a lot of trees necessarily, and it still functioned fully in the same way. You have canopies that can be, in our case, several hundred feet before we cut those trees, and now we are wondering, oh, it's an 80-foot tall tree. It's a baby tree. So we had those big tall canopies. Have you ever stood under a big duck fir in a rainstorm? How wet do you get? Barely anything. Because the canopy captures most of that water. And then the water, as it's dripping down and rolling down on that tree, it just comes in little bits, meaning that whatever is below it is not going to get soaked. It doesn't experience that same rain that the higher canopy had seen. Then we have our tall understory canopy, the medium understory canopies like wine maples and such, and then our shrub layers, and then our taller perennial layers, such ferns and other things. And then we have the ground covers and ultimately the duff layer on the ground. And all of these together act as sponges. So by the time that rain hit the soil, before we took the forest out, there was very little slow-moving water that actually watered the critters and supported them in their life and had a positive impact. It didn't cause erosion. It didn't damage things in its path. And then that soil layer was absorbing the water gently and slowly. And as the water was moving subsurface, it would find its way into the aquifer and into the natural wetlands, ponds, streams over time. So we had maybe a heavy rainstorm, and I will talk about that too because it actually wasn't all that common. We would have a heavy rainstorm in the winter, but that water took time to get to the water, the lake nearby. It may never arrive until July. In the stream in July. So we actually had a steady water flow in that stream all year long. I am very sure that you're all familiar with today's streams in the city. We have very high water levels during winter storms, and we dry out in the summer. It's not uncommon to see streams go completely bare, no water. If you were a fish, how do you think you survived that summer in the stream? Not very well. You probably look like a skeleton at the end of that summer. So we altered the hydrology in the soil very effectively for the worst. And then what happened too is that water from the canopy that was captured in the tree would be evaporated and transpired, the two words together, evapotranspiration, back into the atmosphere where it would create clouds again and start that pattern of falling and lifting for the water again. And we had a balanced climate. Now, with these changes that we created, we don't have the steady evapotranspiration happening. And we are experiencing here in the Northwest too are unusually sunny and dry periods that we didn't have before because we don't have a cloud cover anymore that we used to have. This is very disturbing. So this is how LID, low impact development, came about. And the idea behind it was to reduce the damage. Because still, when you're talking to people, you will hear, it's not fair to ask that we change our life back in one day to sustainable. We can't just expect people to throw away their chemicals and throw away their bad practices and do something different tomorrow. Well, we may not be able to ask that, but our planet is actually asking for it. If we are not doing it, we're going to be tossed overnight into very interesting places. So low impact development was the gradual pattern. Now we finally arrived to the positive impact, and it has to happen very soon. And there is money actually behind it from forward-thinking governments. So low impact development looks at this, what we created, and tries to make it function in terms of water like this. Because you cannot build the forest back. Let's be honest. This takes thousands of years. It didn't just happen overnight, and it does need time, and we destroyed it overnight. Because we can't ask people to change overnight, but we sure can do that to nature. So hydrologically, we're asking our built environment to function like a forest in the Northwest, or like the prairie in the Midwest, or wherever you are, you're trying to mimic your natural environment. That's what low impact development does. It thrives to soak that rain in because we need it. We cannot afford to pipe it away. We won't have drinking water. If we're not recharging our aquifer, we won't be drinking. It wants to slow that water down. So instead of hitting within minutes after the rain is starting and causing a flash flood in the stream bed, slow it down and make it so that January rain doesn't show up in our streams until June, because it's moving through soil instead of a pipe. Spread it out over a vast area, because the canopy of a duck fir, when you add all the surfaces of the branches and the little needles and everything else, it's tremendous. It covers a large area, so spread it out as much as we can. And filter that water, because this is what our forests and our soils did. First of all, we didn't have all this industrial stuff coming down in the rain, but then they were able to take anything that did come from volcanic activity or whatnot and filter that. So they can actually help filtering the water. Soil does an incredible work at filtering water. And then you want to soak this water, whatever is still remaining, into the ground again. Put minimal into pipe, if any, at all. And then I want to talk about this here, because today we will be talking mostly about green roofs and vertical plantings and low impact development related to that, and food growing related to that. Sustainability is a very big subject. And when you're looking at how sustainable really is, you got to evaluate what you are looking at. This is a set of questions that was developed back, I don't know, 8 or 10 years ago now, by the Sustainable Development Task Force of Snohomish County, which we had running for some years. And one of our projects was to actually create a standard on how we can look at new solutions that were brought to us, how we can decide whether or not we really qualified as a sustainable solution. And when we talk about green roofs and green balls, these questions will become very important. So production of whatever you're using, is that really a better system? And when you're looking at it, you have to look at all the different aspects of carbon footprint, transportation, water, air quality, jobs, wages, conditions for those people. If they work 24/7 like I do, is that out of choice like for me? Or it is because they have no other ways to pay for the food? Is it slavery? What is it? And then, is that material really green in its lifetime? And how do we define green, by the way? That's why the blue economy came about. How do we define green? We were so focused on just materials, people got sort of forgotten about that. Disposal of that item, how can you do that sustainably and responsibly? Are you adding to the landfill, or it's something that can be used again? And then financial reflections, because truly, yes, there is this saying that if somebody thinks that the environment is not as important as the economy, then have them hold their breath while they count their money. It's true. But at the same time, if we can only make things happen on grants, we very soon will not be here financially. Things have to make sense. We don't have to have the amount of bonuses for the amount of CEOs that we have now, but we all have to be able to keep ourselves floating financially too. So the cost of installation does matter. And then the cost of operation and maintenance. And when you're looking at costs, both of installation, both of maintenance, you have to look at not just how much work that is, for example, and what it takes, but what quality of work. Is it a skilled work or it's a robotic work? What are we doing to the people who are participating in this? Will these people be happy? Because as far as values in economy, we don't have a bottom line that says happiness level. But if we are all miserable while we're earning that bottom line, it had no point. Because when you think back at life, and you know, it's interesting, last year was pretty changing for me. It drove it home very well. I lost 5 really dear friends toward the end of the year. And 2 of them, I was with them to the last minute. When they look back, when we will look back, we're not going to look at the bottom line. We're going to look at that question, happiness. How was that? So what are we doing to the people who we are involving in these phases? And then how difficult that is, and does it require training maybe? And when we provide that training like you are sitting here, are we opening your world? Are we making you excited? Do you like coming here? Is this something that you will always think back as something incredible and beautiful? And then what are the additional benefits, which can be all kinds of things. Ecosystem, community, all of this matters. And additional benefits, for example, the pervious concrete. Its goal was to create a surface that allows the water to penetrate into the soil and refill our aquifers. But it also helps roots because it allows them to breathe. It happens to help microorganisms in the soil below because it allows for the oxygen. That's benefits that were not calculated ahead. And then you will also have problems that are unexpected, but you always expect the unexpected because it is just a matter of when and not if. And when you look at all of that, you can actually start making decisions about the very material that you're using and say, is this a sustainable practice really, or it's not? And here is another image that when you will be looking through the slide show, I want you to really think about, because it shows the layers a little bit better in the soil. Aquifers and what happens, and how water actually can sit between the gravel and the sand particles. And these are much better aquifers than clay. So where is the aquifer for us is either sometimes actually below hard clay pan, or right on top of it where we have gravelly pockets and sandy pockets. Underneath Everett, actually, about 60, 65 deep, you have beach sand from previous geological times. It's beautiful sand. So once again, this is what we're mimicking. And then cost-wise, we have now proven with Seattle leading charge in the nation that 50-year maintenance And the installation is more cost-effective of these systems, green and low-impact development technologies, than the traditional development. It's important to keep in mind that overall the cost is less. So, green roofs. It's one of those things that we hear about a lot. I love green roofs when they are done responsibly. And I really believe that a lot of the green roof systems that we have are done incredibly irresponsibly. And we would be better off if we just kept our roof. But I will talk about that in a little bit more detail as we go on. It's a low-impact development technology. In some parts of our country and the world now, it's a required technology. That if you're building a new building or remodeling, you have to use green roofs if you are within a certain city limit. It has very good goals behind it, very good reasons behind it. And green roofs and green walls are those fields that got the biggest greenwash. Greenwash means when something is sold as green, sustainable, and yet in reality it does very little toward that. We have two kinds of green roof systems, and one is intensive, the other is called extensive. Intensive has deep soils. Usually, if you reach 8 to 10 inches, you're in that gray area that some people will call intensive, others will call extensive. Beyond that 10 inches, once you're in a foot or deeper soil, you are in an intensive roof. And if you are below that 8 inches, it's an extensive roof. Sometimes roofs can have only 2 inches of soil on them, believe it or not. That would be the very end spectrum of an extensive roof. What drives these management systems is the ability to store water on the roof and slowing it down. Because if you think about it, there is a layer underneath that roof we call building. So it's not going to soak it into the ground. None of us would like to sit in a building that's actually part of the aquifer. So it is just storing water, delaying the impact, and enabling the water to evapotranspire a little bit through that vegetation back into the atmosphere. It does a lot of other things, however. Green roofs have benefits that may not even relate to stormwater management. We have green roofs that can be modular. This is a modular system. It's a pretty old picture. The planting in it changed, and I will talk about that a little bit more. Green roofs have their own way of existing, and they are not your typical landscaping. If this is how you wished that roof to look for the rest of its existence, you would have to be on that roof a lot. This roof completely changed. A lot of things died out. Most of the other things that didn't die out took over. And part of it is we have some new things in there too. Part of it is that birds will come and help you along with maintenance. This roof probably is maintained once every 2 years. So it's not looking like this anymore. These are green roofs that are a little bit more on the maintained side, so they actually keeping their look a little bit more, unless they don't add a budget, because these are public buildings. One is actually the up corner is here on Woodby Island in Clinton. These are the Colorado Observation Center. This is Chicago, and this is in Singapore. Singapore had experienced tremendous amount of pollution. Because of the currents in the ocean, they ended up with a lot of trash actually at their coastline. And if you look at pictures that were about a decade old now, people were sometimes able to walk on trash really in the water. But they did spend money because they make a lot of money. Singapore is actually a very rich country and area because that's where a lot of the business happens. They're investing it into recreating what's happening in the cities. So this is their roof system. In Chicago, we now have regulations that ask that remodeling and new construction use these green roof and green wall and low impact development technologies unless there really is some limitations that they cannot overcome. What's actually common in all of these is, what do you feel when you look at these images? How do you feel? Is it a positive experience? If you were neighbors and you would be working in your office and this is what you would be looking at, would you like that view? Yeah. So this actually has a positive impact on the community. Another thing that it does is it helps with the heat island effect. In the cities where we have all those pavements and roofs, a lot of places like Singapore, like Chicago, when the sun comes out, it gets really hot. We don't necessarily have that problem here in Seattle. But in other parts of the world where sun is more common, the city can get very hot. And that's the heat island effect, because around the city, otherwise temperature is very different. But with all these reflective surfaces, it gets too hot to be in it. These roofs mitigate that. They add to air quality because they are vegetation. So they have some really important benefits. They also help with heating and cooling costs within the building because it's another insulation layer. This is a green roof that is from actually Ireland, and I would think that they have to mow that. So I don't think personally that having grassy surfaces on a roof is a very good idea. In Ireland, it's a very ancient tradition because green roofs are not new. And it goes back actually to thousands of years. And it's not uncommon to actually see in some parts of the world a goat or two on the roof helping themselves to breakfast or dinner because they're mowing the roof. Right there. And it's totally fine. These are old systems that existed for quite some time. It's amazing. Mm-hmm.
So I'm relatively new to roof systems like this. How do you keep the material underneath that organic matter from rotting out? I mean, I'm sure there's layers of something.
So we're gonna go through those layers today.
Okay.
But in the case of the old technology, it was bark layers, several of them, and they redid the roof regularly. So houses, even when it's made out of straw, like roof, every 3-4 years you had to redo that because you had critters living in the straw roof, and if you didn't, you started to get a leaky roof, or critters were falling on your bed at night because they chewed their way through. So you had to maintain that, and you had to do these things, and the people did that in the summer. It was something that villagers would get together, and a group would go around, and they fixed everybody's house. This is, I think actually it's no longer there. I will drive through that area sometimes in the next month and see, but it's actually a Woodby Island picture. And I'm pretty sure nobody lives in the house. This, I love it. It's very fascinating. If we could actually just have something like that, I always thought it's just awesome. But being in that house, I don't know. I mean, you probably have to move roots as you're walking through the living room.
Advertisement for roof maintenance at this point.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, that's what happens if you stay put in the Northwest, right? Yeah. Not just moss, but dog furs will grow on you. Then this is from Asia, Middle East actually, not completely Asia. And these are intensive roofs. The way to tell is that you have trees here. Lots of trees and a lot of shrubs. And the grass, I think, actually is artificial grass on that roof. It looks like that to me.
You don't know where this one is?
No, I know that it's in Middle East. I belong to a lot of green roof groups, and we have sometimes pictures come through, and there you go. This is in Ireland, an old roof system once again, and the houses actually are built into a hillside, so critters can just walk up, take care of breakfast, and leave. And then this is in Japan, a terrace system, and it's part of what people do in the city. They can get up here and then they can sort of wander through the park setting that's on the roof. I would say that probably OSHA would have a serious problem with that in the US here, that people are walking along. But each country has has varying regulations, and in some places people also have more common sense, I'm just saying. Then this one is, again, in Denver, Colorado. It's the Rocky Mountain Observation Center. Fresh installation. You can see the modular system. It looks very different today for many reasons. You can actually see the irrigations running through here, the pipes. This is at a library back east. I can't remember which state now. It's an intensive roof to a degree because of the trees here. But I can tell you that this is adding another room to the library. If you were, able to go up on the roof and sit on a deck, that's great. Here are your layers. This is actually a pretty standard image, and then I have some other things here to show you when we're talking layers. Lots of layers. And what those layers are made of and how they are placed makes a world of difference in terms of sustainability. These are no longer bark layers. They no longer decompose, and they will not go back to nature when you leave it in a pile next to the building. This stuff lasts forever, especially with our new building standards that we're pushing for, so that our buildings will be designed for at least 100 years, because it's a joke that our 20-year-old houses are falling apart. So we're now designing to at least 100 years, and that means that in terms of green roofs, these things will have to last for a long, long time. We have experimenters out there trying to come up with material that, are we still okay on time? Trying to come up with material that will have a lifetime. And so 100 years after its installation, it will start to disintegrate and go away. But it's very difficult to come up with those things and make sure that it's good for the environment as it breaks down. You can see here that we have the structural support. That would be the top of your roof, plywood, for example. And that's one thing that you have to make sure that it's designed right. You will not be designing the green roof structure for a building even if you go into the landscape designer program here, because that's an engineering project. Engineers design these. But you will have to maybe work with an engineer who's designing a green roof. And so you have input. And it's important that you see those layers and you understand what they're working on. So you have your roof surface. Then you have a roofing membrane. And that can actually be the same tar-based material that we have underneath our regular roofs. Another bad thing for us to breathe in, but, or eat for that matter. But we have to have a membrane. There are some new non-leaching materials out. They're non-leaching in their roof lifetime, supposedly, although that's another thing to understand, that these roof systems, we have them around for 15 years maybe. So do we really have a lot of data? Can we really say that, oh, sure, it's fine, just, yeah, no problem, doesn't hurt you? We can't really tell for sure yet. So we have roof membrane, and then we have that membrane protection layer that's called root barrier, because you have vegetation growing there. And what roots do? They penetrate things. How many of you had seen that there's a little hole on the pot, or it grows right into the clay pot, depending on what plant you have. So you need to protect your roof from that. You don't want the duck fir root to come into the living room. And then you have insulation. Let's talk insulation. That's something that I hate with a vengeance. Have you ever seen those pink foams the foam boards, do they ever destruct? No, they just break down into smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller particles. But they are permanent, and they are horrible. We have wildlife that's dying out there every single day, and it's a real thing. It's not that 5 birds dropped dead today. It's large numbers and all kinds of critters, including bacteria, by the way, in the soil and water. But we have critters out that die from eating things that they shouldn't be eating, but their body eats it. They can swallow it. Their stomach fills up. A lot of times they are full, but get no nutrition, or it clogs their system, or it punctures their organs, or it poisons them from inside out. And foam is one of those things that will be picked up by animals when it gets smaller and smaller, and they will eat it. And it's terrible, and it never goes away, and then it gets into the wind, and it floats into Pacific trash island. And when we have a plane that we lose, we can't find it because there is so much trash on the water that we can't tell if it's a plane or a trash island. Then we have, very much against foam. I'm just telling you that if I see a system that uses foam, I'm not using it, sorry. It's out. And that will tell you why I'm using very limited systems, if at all. So drainage and aeration and water storage and another layer of root barrier. That's sometimes all in one. Sometimes these are different layers. And the reason behind it is that you have to, once again, plants will grow into that foam no problem, break it up. So you want to protect the insulation layer. And you want to have at least 2 root barriers. It's a good practice, especially if you have raccoons around, because those guys will dig. So having double root protection, roof protection from roots is helping. Then drainage, because this is a stormwater solution for 1+, you're not building a pond on the roof. You need to make sure that the water, when it's in excess, can drain away, and it drains away predictably. It doesn't show up somewhere where you don't want it, but you can actually tell where it's going. Predictability is what drives design. Even if you are growing food, you have to sort of have a plan, and you want to sort of know that you're following it to a degree. And if you end up somewhere else where you originally were going, you can alter course and change your patterns. And the water storage layer. This is where rainwater actually gets stored in the roof. It's an additional void space, because I said that the goal is to capture as much rain as possible, slowing it on the roof before it hits the stream system. So you have to have an area to store it in. This is your layer for that. Then you have another layer on top of it to sort of hold up your soil if this is needed, not always. And now you have your growing medium. We call it green roof soil, but it has very little to do with soil. These are so artificial soils that I can't even tell you. And it makes, again, a very big difference depending on what's in it, because there are so many things out there. And if they come from a factory where it's actually very high carbon footprint and it's really high energy to produce that material, it wasn't green after all. But the challenge is with the growing medium is that it has to drain fairly well, but be able to store water at the same time fairly well. It has to support plant life to a degree. You design your plants with the soil in mind and vice versa. But it has to be lightweight because it's on a roof. And imagine, you can see how heavy things can be. So sand, for example, that drains really well and can do all these wonderful things mixed with compost would be wonderful, like a rain garden soil. Isn't that great? But it's heavy, very heavy. So now we have people adding, vermiculite and perlite and all kinds of things, trying to come up with that perfect weight and plant supporting combination. Very challenging. And these soil mixes sometimes will not support microbial life. The plants can grow in them if you keep fertilizing them, but fungus and bacteria and other organisms will not necessarily like it. So you're not building an ecosystem, but you're very limited in what you can do in terms of soil mixes. And then in terms of plants, because they are really very closely related. And then you have your plant material. So these are the layers of a typical green roof installation. Then it's designed in mind with stormwater management. These are a little bit more sustainable depending on what these layers are made of. And one big thing is that we solved a lot of the layer problems with metal. If that metal actually comes from recycled metal, it makes a lot of sense. But if we had to fight a war and kill off entire villages to get to that very special lightweight metal, then it wasn't a good idea after all. And the energy, where that comes from? Is it an alternative energy that we're producing, or we are using fracking technology? I mean, all of this has to count. Every single thing has to count anymore. And then you have all of these layers, and what are those made of? Recycled material, maybe there is a big push for that. Is it also recyclable again? And how you build it up to the very end, what your soil is. If it's actually an intensive roof layer, you may just get somewhere where it's more sustainable. And then we're looking at the modular and solid roof systems. This is a solid roof system with some pavers and a seating area on top. Or you saw those modular systems where you saw the little boxes, these little planter trays. If those are actually made from recycled material, let's get back to this slide really quick, then just the tray itself can solve a lot of these layer problems. With that tray and metal, you can actually get to a very reasonably sustainable green roof system. Because then you don't need that foam, you don't need those evil things. And I'm not calling them evil to be funny, I think they really are. So, installation issues, modular or solid. A modular system, installing it, not very big trays. Let's get the smallest trays, 2 feet by 2 feet. And it's only 3 or 4 inches deep. Soil and plants are in it, ready-made. You take it up on the roof and plop it down. Isn't that an easy thing to do? Except that these little beasts are weighing 78 to 90 pounds, depending on is it wet or not. How easy to maneuver that? Oh, very nice. After 3 or 4, you're probably going to be in the chiropractor's office for the rest of the year. If you actually building a solid system where there are no dividers and you can put your soil down and then you can put your plant in, it may be an easier on the back exercise. And that's something to think about also. Cost per area, that really varies, and it can be very expensive. Well, usually 1 square foot nowadays is anywhere from $32 to $150, depending on how intensive, how extensive, modular or solid system what you're using. Very expensive compared to a traditional roof. Durability depends. Usually, if the modular systems are created out of a material that's UV resistant, it compares fairly well. Otherwise, your solid system will live a much longer life. Because if the material breaks down when it's exposed to UV, the edges of those modules will be always exposed no matter what you do. Because one thing is that you put that roof in, but you walk away, and within minutes you have birds, and in some cases squirrels and many other things helping you out, and they will change your design regardless. Lifetime performance. It's also about looks. because the goal, I mean, to me, if I had a roof, I probably would like this more than modules where I have to step over these frames and make sure that I don't break the edges off and so forth. This is more usable. This is something that I would prefer if I had a roof to enjoy. So look and feel is subjective, but it also matters. Short-term and long-term benefits. Now comes, the uncanny stuff around the hospital, for example, when patients are looking at the window. If they look at something that is vegetated and is used by other critters too, and maybe people, it's a more positive experience, and people get better faster. Long-term benefits can be the stormwater storage. The roof actually lasts longer if it's built well, and heating and cooling costs, so those all add up. Maintenance is a really big challenge, and we're going to talk about that because it matters for food or non-food both. It's very important to think about, and in the design, maintenance is often not thought about because very few people think about maintaining things. That's actually one big thing about food growing, because practically that's all you do. When you're growing food, 90% of your activities is maintaining your space and working with that on a daily basis. But typical landscape designs and landscape architecture, it's a build it, looks great, walk away from it, low maintenance, and then not even think about maintenance. And if it's not maintainable, then what do we do with that? And back to the foam, end-of-life solutions. How do you dispose of that stuff when you don't want it? Not just because the 100 years expired and you have to rebuild the house maybe, but you just, quite frankly, don't want it anymore. You're changing your plans. So green roofs, typically, we talked about mimicking the forest. That's what our rain gardens do around here. But green roofs really are more meadow type and beach-like plant material most of the time, because forests are very heavy, deep soils and big root balls. It costs a lot to put those on the roof. You have to rebuild that building for sure. So extensive roofs are less expensive and easier to manage in construction. And so also, sad as it is, it requires a whole lot less skill to maintain an extensive roof than an intensive roof, where you have to know about pruning and the different vegetation. And in an extensive roof where you have maybe one or two little low-growing species, that's typically a ground cover, you don't have to do as much that requires skill. So these are mostly the roof habitats that you see all around the world that's mimicked. But intensive roofs, you can do all kinds of things. You can put planters up and whatnot. And this is where we're going to talk about food here pretty soon. Extensive roof. And then these are some of the plants. I'm not going to go through these plant material into much detail because this is not the edible stuff. But I want to go back to the food growing relating to our green roof system. When you are growing food in a roof space, it's not a stable, steady, predictable arrangement. Because with food growing, unless it's a food forest type growing or where you have just simply shrubs that you harvest berries or leaves or both off of, when you're really growing intensively the edibles, you move things around constantly. They have very special soil requirements. They have very special water requirements. And they constantly harvest it out and starting over. So you cannot produce then a canopy that's predictable and steady, staying in place, undisturbed and unchanged. You cannot predict the root system, and you constantly in the way of changing. So you can actually grow food, even annuals on a roof. And it's a good idea because in the city we have very limited spaces, so use it. But most of the time, if it's a food plant, it will not qualify you for stormwater credit. And this is actually why we went through all this stormwater understanding, that we have low impact development that addresses stormwater. And unless you grow some very specific edible plants that are limited in numbers, your food growing is not going to add any management for stormwater. That means that if you are actually building under the new codes that requires you to use a low impact development technology, mitigating the stormwater on site, and your green roof is part of that management system, you cannot alter it and grow food on there. Because the roof at that point is a stormwater management facility. And even if it's really nice and you just bought this house and you're excited because the best place to grow the tomatoes and the squashes is on the first floor roof, and you can access it maybe from your bedroom, if you alter that roof, you lose the stormwater credit, and with good reason. Because you will be changing vegetation regularly. No engineer will ever sign off on that. With that said, you can actually put edible plant material up on a roof. What would you say you can grow in a 8 to 10 inch deep extensive roof that is not necessarily woody, although it could be woody material, will be living there, and you can harvest maybe once or twice a year so that you can get the stormwater credit, and then you can get some benefits of the food. What are those things that will actually be okay?
Strawberries,
Yeah, that can work sometimes.
berry crops,
Yeah, berry crops, okay.
your fruit trees.
Extensive roof. We're talking extensive roof. So berry crops would be strawberries and
Yeah, can you explain extensive roof?
yeah, extensive is the shallow. Yeah, less than 8 inches for sure. Yeah, for soil.
Herbs.
Herbs. Very good. Yes. What do you have to have on that roof in order to do this? You have to have this. Well, that's one thing. And then? Then? The medium, like some of the herbs will grow, like oregano is so, they can grow in just about anything. Path and access. If you cannot get up there and harvest safely, you're not going to be able to enjoy any of that. How many roofs do you see with access on it? Very, very few. These roofs are designed to be walked away from, not to walk on. But yes, without access, you won't get it. It's just going to stay there. So yes, you could grow herbs. You could grow some berry crops. When we do the roof design and we want to get that stormwater credit, what do you think a very important thing is about leaves and the type of plant that we use on that roof? What does it have to be like?
A perennial?
Yeah, well, when do we get our rains most? Winter, so it better be an evergreen plant. Because if the roof has no canopy over in the winter, erosion will be tremendous. Now you just add it to the problem. It's not bad enough that you have roof runoff, but now it has all kinds of soil particles in it, and media, and growing media, and whatever else is there. So you have to have foliage all winter. That limits your choices once again. Strawberries, actually, more often than not, some of the varieties that we have here, in fact the native ones especially, have a tendency to be more evergreen than not. So it wouldn't be the seascape in that case. You probably would be growing our beach strawberries, but it's picking up as a crop because it's a foraging item. And then some of the herbs too can be evergreen. This is also why, like rosemary grows well on roofs, because it's a very well-draining soil growing media that they have. What kills rosemary in our winters? The wetness, the soil, yeah, that's just soggy. The cold has to do with it a little bit. But if we have cold, most of the time the plant will still come back from a much more limited canopy than it was originally, freezes back. But what kills the roots too is that sogginess. So on a roof, we don't have that. It drains really well. That's the idea. So you can grow some of those things very well. Creeping rosemary is one of those things, and you can harvest it well if you have a path. But in the summertime, typical green roofs, what is the goal with the green roof? Yes, and as in terms of irrigation, not much going on, right? We don't want to have to irrigate our roofs too much. So again, if you're growing a crop such as an annual pepper, eggplant, tomato, squash, that roofs would be ideal for because they get so much good sun most of the time, you have to water those plants. And sometimes you would have to water them more than once a day. So that is undoing the whole purpose of a stormwater roof. What can you do with that runoff, however, if you grow on the roof? What do you do with having these layers? We had seen the layers. I can go back actually to that slide. Maybe it's better to park ourselves there. You all seen squashes. Here. We have some storage, right, for water on the roof. What can you do with that in the summertime? Can you collect that? Yes. Can you recycle it onto the roof and water again? Yes. And so that's actually something to think about. When you have a food growing surface on the roof, recycling the water. What is the most common, however, on a roof when you're growing food? These are more advanced when you're actually building a house or remodeling a house and you're thinking ahead and you are extending your garden space and you decide that your new roof from now on will be part of your food garden. And you want to go to that extra expense and design it well and build it that way. Most of us have a house with a roof that we might be able to access that might be a flat roof. And then we decide to grow food there. So we end up carrying containers up on that roof. What is important about that before you do any of it? What do you want to first check out? Yes, the weight. What can your roof hold? How many, whatever you're bringing up there, can it hold and support? Because some things are very heavy. Typical containers can be very heavy. If it's a plastic container, a hypertufa, an oak barrel, it's a little bit lighter weight. But then you add your soil to it. What would most of us gardeners who want to eat that really tasty food put into that container? What would our idea be? Lots of compost, rich amended soil. It can get very heavy. So what would you think as far as depth for a container? In order to grow a carrot, do you really need an oak barrel? No. You know, a 12 or 14-inch deep container for the most part will grow just about anything that you would want to grow, right? So you can limit weight. If back is a problem and you want to stand up straight, you can actually have containers or create a fake bottom so that you limit the volume of the soil while you keep that height that you need to save your back from bending. So we have weight that we thought about. We can create a drain in that container and capture the water that's excess as we irrigate, and we can reuse that water. So we talked about that a little bit. What other challenges are on a roof that you would really have to consider? Wind, that's a very big challenge because it doesn't just destroy canopy, but it does another thing. it dries things out. Yeah, even just a gentle breeze, if it's constant, which happens on a roof, it dries things out. So what does that do to our irrigation need? It increases that. And then what else is happening on roofs? Wind, actually, for the container standpoint. I lived on Camino Island fairly briefly in the last century. Doesn't that sound good? But anyway, we had a storm once. I had all these oak barrels on the deck, and they were filled with tomatoes and everything else. And we had a windstorm come through. And when I woke up in the middle of the night, it sounded horrendous out there because my oak barrels were on their sides, and the wind was tossing them happily around on the deck. And that was a deck, not a roof where the wind actually can really speed up. So when you have containers, you might want to think about securing them so they don't get blown off the roof or don't tip over. It's a big deal. So, yes. Then what else happens on a roof? Or what doesn't happen sometimes? Pollination. Because depending on where you are, if you are in the city on the 30th floor, you won't really have a lot of insects flying up that high, wanting to look at your flowers and do something. And if you have bees that high, those bees may not be very happy up on the 30th floor because it's not just that it's really windy. You can build wind protection, you can build temperature control around them, so the sun and the cold, because cold is also extreme on a roof compared to the ground level. You can sort of protect them. But will they really want to go all the distance to forage for other food? And if you don't have enough for them on your roof, then they starve and die. So it's not that easy to just say, oh yes, let's put bees on the roof. Great. How are you going to keep them alive? Where is that roof? How far high up is that roof? And then who are your visitors? If your roof is a lower roof and it's easy to get to from other roofs, you may actually have a lot of furry critters. You can maybe have squirrel life up there quite intensely. And if you didn't do your insulation right, they will dig through the root barrier. Yep. On a green roof, actually, a lot of times, it's not the dandelion that's the problem, but it's the nut tree that they planted for you. You can also have raccoons up there, and they can dig. And that really should make you think twice about, bless you, about having water features up on roofs, because that's a magnet for raccoons, for example. And once they are there, they're going to check it out. And then you have lots of birds. Again, depending on how high that building is, you may only have seagulls and eagles, but you will have some birds. If you are on a lower roof, you will have other guys there. And so they will want to nest, they will want to look at things and change what you have going on. If you have a lower roof, typical house, couple stories, you're growing food, and you have a drip irrigation system. What do you think can happen at night with that drip irrigation system? In the summer, you're in a city, there isn't much water at. Well, Mr. Raccoon will use it as his fountain. Will drink. Will chew right through it to drink. I see it happen sometimes out in areas where there is tree areas and such in the more edges of the cities. Drip irrigation, in the dry season, critters will dig and find and use it if it's running during the night, when actually it's really a good way to water. So you want to time your irrigation right, and you want to make sure that it doesn't become something that is functioning a little bit differently, because it can cause a lot of problems. If you have a leaky irrigation pipe on your roof, better have those insulation layers, right? So then looking at all the food production, what we see actually in roof farming more than anything is predictably containerized, sheltered growing, where you have the way to control climate,